Are you wondering why this Pope is screaming as if someone took the last piece of cake? Hello, friends. My name is Brian Zygmunt. It's time for another episode of Art History Fun with Dr. Brian. And I have another request from a former colleague at Clark University, the amazing Dr. Gary Arms, who wanted to hear a little bit about Francis Bacon. I assume the painter and not the philosopher. And so, Dr. Arms, hold my copy of Milton. It's time for a marvelous sentence. It's Bacon time. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about two men, one pope, and what can only be described as a severe case of artistic obsession that resulted in one of the most famous and horrifyingly brilliant art historical remixes of all time. Before we look at the canvas, we have to first talk about Francis Bacon, not the philosopher. I'm sure that guy was a lot of fun, and hey, let's have 3 cheers for the scientific method. But instead, I want to talk today about the 20th century British painter who lived a life so chaotic, full, dramatic, and liquor-soaked that it makes modern rock stars look like accountants. Born in Dublin in 1909, Bacon had a bit of a rocky start. His father was a tyrannical horse trainer who kicked Francis out of the house as the teenager for trying on his mother's dresses. Naturally, Bacon did what any self-respecting iconoclast would do. He ran off to Berlin and London, threw himself into the underground nightlife, drank heavily, gambled recklessly, and taught himself how to paint. His London studio in Soho was legendarily filthy. A hurricane of paint tins, discarded photographs, empty champagne and bourbon bottles, and takeout containers. Out of this glorious disaster came some of the most haunting, visceral, and existential art of the modern era. Bacon did not want to paint pretty landscapes. He wanted to paint the nervous human systems and lay them bare on canvas. Now this brings us to Bacon's ultimate obsession, Diego Velazquez's 1650 painting, Portrait of Pope Innocent X. Now, if we take a look at Velazquez's original, you can see a variety of things that I think will hold our attention. Now, Velazquez was the premier court painter for the King of Spain during the middle part of the 17th century, and he rolled into Rome to paint Pope Innocent X. The Pope was notoriously tough, shrewd, and I feel bad for saying this, but he's kind of ugly. Velazquez sat him in a sea of blinding red velvet robes and captured him looking like a man who could excommunicate you just by blinking. He looks so sharp, he looks intelligent, suspicious, and powerful that when the Pope saw the finished portraits, he famously muttered, "Too true!" It was the ultimate flex of Baroque political portraiture. Now, if we fast forward 300 years to 1953, we can turn our attention now to Bacon's image. Francis Bacon became utterly obsessed with this painting during the early part of his career. He brought books on it, taped black and white photos of it to its studio wall, and spent years staring at it. But here's my favorite piece, one of my favorite bits of art history trivia. When Bacon finally visited Rome, where the original painting stands in the Galleria Dorfi Pamphili, he flat out refused to go and see it. Like, this blows my mind. Can you imagine, like, spending your life fixating on a single thing, being within a block of it, and then refusing to go and look at it? He was so terrified that seeing the real thing would ruin the myth that he had built up in his own head that he stayed in his hotel room and refused to go near it. Talk about a commitment to being an introvert. And listen, I understand. So what did Bacon do with this obsession? Well, he made one of the greatest remixes in the history of Western art. He took Portrait of Pope Innocent X and gave it a new spin. If Velazquez's portrait says, "I hold the keys to heaven and earth, don't mess with me, bucko," Bacon's Pope is instead screaming, "I just stepped on a Lego, and my pain is immense." Bacon takes this earlier painting, cool, the calculating Holy Father, and strips away every ounce of his earthly authority. He traps the Pope inside a glowing yellow 3D cage or glass box, reminiscent of an electric chair or soundproof isolation chamber. The brilliant red robes are turned into a decaying, shadowing purple. Vertical streaks of paint run down the glitching cathode ray TV-like tube, and instead of that icy, piercing stare that we get from the Baroque masterpiece, Bacon instead turns the Pope's face into a terrifyingly silent but glass-shattering scream. Where did that scream come from? Well, Bacon did not just pull it out of thin air. He smashed this earlier portrait together with a screenshot from Eisenstein's famous silent film Battleship Potemkin, specifically the image of a screaming nurse with broken glasses on the Odessa steppes, and illustrations from medical textbooks on mouth diseases. Because nothing quite says, my friends, papal magistry quite like combining Baroque royalty with a dental nightmare. Ultimately, comparing these two works is a lesson in how art reflects its time. The earlier Baroque work lived in an area of absolute monarchies with divine rights, both kings and popes, and power was solid, certainly intimidating and majestic, and I would even say without question. Bacon, on the other hand, he lived in post-World War II Europe, an era defined by collective trauma, nuclear anxiety, existential threats, and the coming of the Cold War. If Diego gives us the impenetrable mask of the ultimate power, that is the Pope, the Pope had power, right? Like, you don't like what the Pope does, the Pope will excommunicate you. That's power. Bacon instead rips the mask off to show the terrified, fragile human screaming underneath the common man. So, my friends, the next time you're feeling a little overwhelmed by the weight of modern life, just remember, even the 17th century popes have days where they want to get into a glass cube and scream into the cosmic void. In closing, let me comment that I think there's a really marvelous relationship between the paintings of Francis Bacon and the writings of the French philosopher and playwright Jean-Paul Sartre. In both instances, our creators are dealing with shallow, small, claustrophobic spaces that people often fight or struggle to get out of. And I think this very much captures the existential dread of many in the middle part of the 20th century following the conclusion of the Second World War. Dr. Arms, thank you. I appreciate you getting me out of my 18th and 19th century comfort zone. And to everyone else, thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time. Again, always happy to take requests.